Over 10 million men are in the armed forces. Bringing them back into civilian life would present a difficult problem, even if they had only been away overnight. It would be an even greater problem if all those more than 10 million had been away for 3 years on a holiday. What then are the dimensions of the problem when over 10 million have been in war? This is real. And after months and years of war, battle or drudgery, no matter where, there is always that bewildering letdown. The big thing has been done, whether squeezing a trigger, or guarding an island, or carrying a stretcher. And suddenly there is no more war. Here is your man. Remember, he isn't naive anymore. He's been places. He's seen things. He has seen and experienced things which should not happen under God, which should not happen under the sun, which should not happen again. Not to his children, not to his friends, not to anyone. He has been toughened to withstand these things. He is no longer illusioned. He is no longer a boy. He has seen war.
You cannot describe war. It's horrible. You cannot even think about it.
I love this guy.
Unless you were there. You were there, you know what I'm talking about.
Band of Brothers.
You were there, you know what I'm talking about. Undescribable.
There's certain amounts of stuff that dredges up some pretty bitter feelings that you have, and times when you were terrified at what was going on, and how badly it affected you.
It was a sigh of relief. It really was. It was a sigh of relief. That was my third battle, and I was just, I was beat. To tell you the truth, I was beat. And I just thought to myself, well, it's over. I'll be going home sooner or later. I don't know when, but I'll be going home sooner or later.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
Roosevelt had
In the
died.
reply, there is no qualification.
Just about a year before the end of the war. Roosevelt had been president for, I think, 3 terms.
I can remember that day very well, waking up and listening to the Armed Forces radio when they dropped the nuclear bomb, and I knew that was the end of the war, you know, and that was quite a day.
I was in a bar in Paris.
What a day, VJ day.
I remember some guy from California grabbed me, some soldier. So he started jitterbugging dancing.
South River.
And I'm no dancer. But he had me try to dance with him in a goddamn bar. And
everyone celebrated.
I must have looked terrible.
Rationing in South River when a
much faster than people expected.
When
They thought they had this thing all scoped
they
out.
had gas.
And they expected about
The
an
gas stations
18-month
got
interlude
gas.
between victory in Europe and the end of the war with Japan.
There'd be lines. Everybody
But it
lined up
happens
to
suddenly,
get it.
and when it happens, there's 12.1 million servicemen still active. We don't even have the shipping to bring them home.
The discharge of GIs under the point system begins. Length of service, combat decorations, and dependents count in the granting of
Carrying
discharges.
troops back.
The backlog of troops going home was way, way, way back with me, frankly, at the end of it, because they'd waited so long before they authorized me to go home.
Enter the wives who want their men home. Tremendous pressure on Congress. Newspapers jumping on this. I thought the war was over.
He said, I'm out. And they said, oh, you can't do it that way. And he said, check my numbers. And he had spent 3 years in the Pacific. He was in 5 combat things. And he had more than enough numbers to have gotten out quite a while ago.
You're sitting there in Holland or Great Britain and your number's up, and where's the ship? Well, we're picking everybody up all over the world. We're the only country to fight this war, air, sea, ground, and globally. So we got to pick all the boys up. And that takes a long time.
Man,
I
that's
came
something to
home
hear
on
them
the
guns
USS
go off.
Vaca,
Huh.
which was a real tug. And we, about
We only had
6 or 8
5-inch. I
days
can
out, we
imagine
got in one of
a
those typhoons.
battleship.
And I just laid down and closed my eyes, and all hell broke
Here they
loose.
are at sea.
Those beams,
I know
steel
what
beams
that
over
was
here,
about.
We were putting our saving gear, our best kits, our canteen cups, and all that up there to get it out of the way.
I had
All of that was falling
good,
off and hitting that
about
steel
4
deck.
years, but 3 years
The
that
kitchen had broke loose, and
with
the
that
stove was
destroyer in the
going from
North
one side
Atlantic.
to the other, and
Couple
bang
of
up against it,
destroyers.
and then you go back to the other side, and back. Oh man, it was noisy. And I thought to myself, now,
these guys
here I've gone
would
through
have rather been in
3
battle.
battles, been over here for over 2 years. Now I'm going to drown going home, and that's the first thing coming to my mind.
That makes me feel
My
good about it a
husband
little
was
bit
a Navy
anyway.
pilot,
I missed it.
and Harvey did not get out of the war until 46. They kept the whole squadron there because they had to get all the wounded back to the United States.
The ones that were serious, we were serious, not dying, but serious.
Here he is
wounded.
again.
Get you back as quick as they could. They flew you
I
back.
wonder if he knew my Uncle Steve.
So
My
I
Uncle
wound up
Steve was
getting
in
back
the
there
Battle of the
real
Bulge.
quick.
Captured.
Then you start,
Prisoner of war.
what the hell? And you're laying there.
Prisoner of
Sit
war.
there, nurse. Get me the hell out of here. Open that goddamn door. I'm gonna jump out. If you don't go out,
They
I'm gonna
machine
take you
gunned
with you.
176 of them
The
and
plane landed.
slaughtered
But
them.
one engine, though.
Americans.
Nothing scared the hell out of you.
Steve wound up on a
When the
train
oil
going
went
to
through, you're gonna wind up in the ocean.
concentration camp. He drank the rest of his life.
We had an idea when he would land on the West Coast, and Daddy figured out how long it would take him to get from the West Coast to Mobile. So at a certain date, my brother John and Dad and I met every train that came into Mobile from the West Coast. And he would never be on it. Mother, we'd come home and Mother'd say, you don't have him. And Daddy'd say, no, he wasn't on that train, Kate. So one night we were sitting eating supper and the phone rang, and Daddy answered it, and he came away from the phone. He says, he's here, Sid's here. So everybody just jumped up from the table. I don't know if we even closed the front door.
I was just so amazed that I was at home. You had dreamed about getting back to Mobile, but I couldn't actually believe
This is
it was
another
happening.
guy. Oh, I wish I'd
was
known
wake
him.
up and find myself back on Pavuvu for a long time.
There's one more story about this guy he's going to tell later.
Get home alive.
I love that story. Where do you hear this one coming up?
I assured him I was fine. I was fine. Just to be home with him.
Yeah, he's fine. He lost his legs or something.
She
He was fine.
Cried some more. Didn't want to turn me loose.
He was good.
Just held on.
He only lost his legs.
Of course, you know, my brother had
Or a leg, one leg, because I remember seeing him in the Battle of the Brothers. Band of Brothers, that's what it was.
You know, they thought,
one leg off.
I probably should have been killed many times, but Irish luck or God saved my life, period.
All the neighbors
I think that guy that just went in before that,
evening.
he was a co-pilot.
And Sid and I were standing in the living room. He was
A
trying
gunner,
to talk
rather.
to all of them. And
When
he got me
they
over to one side.
sunk
He
the
said, "Cat,
carriers,
will you go
Battle
with
of
me up to
Midway.
the drugstore?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "I had to get out of there." He said, "I haven't talked to adults in so long. I've just got to get away a little while and get myself back together."
My father, he was in North China for 6 months before he was able to come home. And you know, a lot of the guys had come home to parades and parties, and there was this outpouring of emotion. Well, when my father came home, it was February of '46. So at that point, a lot of that was over. You know, when he came home, he pulled into the Mobile train station late one night.
An apple don't fall far from the tree.
It still looked pretty good to him, but it was not a rousing homecoming that probably some guys experienced.
First thing I wanted to eat was a hamburger. And I thought, man, this would be great. And people in California didn't know how to make a hamburger. And I thought to myself, I should go in there and get that guy and take him with me and let him come to Texas and learn him how to make a hamburger. But anyway, I got my hamburger.
Learn him how.
What I wanted.
Dr. Sledge had a little Ford coupe that he used for bird hunting. And they told me I was welcome to that, so I got his little car. It smelled like a dog pound, but it had good tires on it, and
he was
it
a
was
hunter,
full of gasoline.
When I landed,
I know we would have got
the
along.
first guy on me, when that emergency landing you, and the stretcher laying down, you can't move.
Here's my man again.
Anything that you wanted, they gave you. Bananas, milk, oranges, ice cream, cake, candy. I'm lazy. I don't know what the
man is
I want everything. Ever hear the Andrew sisters? They're singing, "Maybe rum and Coca-Cola, bing bada bing ba ba ba." And I'm hearing the song lady. I said, "Hey, Louis, chef, can I have rum and Coca slightly?" They bought my 6 of them. I threw them all over rum and Coca-Cola.
Perfect. The man is perfect. I got to have a drink with that man, I'm telling you.
Rum and Coca-Cola song.
Yes, sir. This is what they played during the war. The newsreel. When you went to the movies, there would be a newsreel showing you that little bit about what's going on.
Back to their homes and families in countless American communities today are coming more and more discharged veterans of the Second World War. After years in which they had existed only as a part of a great military organization,
maybe
that
that
clothed them,
no, I don't
fed them,
think
and
that
made
because
decisions for
Guy
them,
Trout
they must soon begin the process of learning to live on their own and to think and act as civilians once more.
Ernie Pyle wrote for the troops, but he also wrote for the home front. And he has an interesting column in 44. He says they're going to start coming home pretty soon, and they've changed. You got to kind of beware of that. The country doesn't know what to expect from these guys. Who are they? How has combat changed them? They don't know exactly how the country's changed. They know people are employed. They know the country's upbeat. They know we won the war. And yet, how am I going to fit in here? because you're coming from a world so dramatically different from the one you're re-entering. And there's no decompression chamber. There's no military training. They teach you how to be a soldier, but they don't teach you how to move from soldier to civilian.
There's no easy way out of war when you've been in a lot of combat. The transition
another good guy.
Was really very difficult, and like all malarkeys, at least this one, I drank a lot, and
I would have joined right in with him.
Out of my mind.
You would have got along with him too.
It was very hard for my father. I can remember him telling me that he spent a lot of time just sitting around staring at the wall, trying to just piece it back together and figure out what he was going to do. The transition was made a lot easier by my grandfather.
Gene's father worked with the war wounded in World War I, and so he had such an understanding of what these men had been through, which helped him then so much with his own son.
For a long time there, Eugene would come out at night and talk, and we would talk and talk and talk. I can remember I'd tell him, I'd say, Eugene, put all that out of your mind. There's just nothing else to do.
Forget it.
The Marine Corps kind of teaches you to suppress your emotions, and you just do not emotionally dwell on matters. The average Marine does not.
Wait till you hear his story a little bit
not
further.
The average Marine.
That is one heck of a story coming up.
Emotionally, really
about this
upset by what he went through. And you can understand it. You have no criticism of it at all. You just know that that's the way it is.
Today, the problem of the returning veteran is a vital
This would be the voice you would hear always at the
Many
newsreels, at the
observers,
movies.
fearful of war's damaging effect on the personalities of those who fight it, look to the future with misgivings. They fear that if returning veterans find little at home but frustration and lack of understanding, if the American people fail to help them reestablish themselves in the community, their reaction will be prompt.
When I heard that voice of this trout about the first Corey
and this came mostly from
sinking,
there's a lot of fear about the veterans.
Got me so riled up I went on the second Corey.
Mentions that, when he had the first veteran reunion for Easy Company, he was turned down by several towns because they thought his guys would wreck the town. They'd have guns and know how to use them.
The word got out there, my God, these men going to have a reunion, Indianapolis, 1946. All out the National Guard, they go to the road, they're going to shoot everybody. You're a killer, you kill people, you're going to wind up, you're a killer.
They were killers.
Nah. Didn't want no part of a gun. The hell with a gun.
No.
And believe it or not, there were actually articles warning that the veterans, because they've been brainwashed by the Army, where all their individuality was lost. And don't forget, this is a time when everybody knew what a Nazi was, okay, and how a Nazi was created. That after the war,
it wasn't lost, it was just refined.
You had some sort of charismatic, fascistic type of leader that would come forward, a Huey Long from the grave or something like this. He could form these veterans into stormtrooper groups and take over the country that wasn't appreciating him, things like that. This is the kind of wild stuff that appears. One article appeared in Ladies' Home Journal. It said, "Are you going to accept your husband?" Well, the woman who wrote the article said, a better question is, do you want him back?
Yeah.
You better take a close look at him, because he's been changed by the war.
You want him back.
So,
more divorce.
Explosion in the
right after the war.
Rate,
I wonder why.
Almost doubles.
Let's try to figure it out.
Triples.
Think about it.
It's the highest divorce rate in 1946 in the history of the country. It's never been topped.
Whether they wanted... never mind. No sense even talking about it.
The marriage just doesn't work out. Particularly if he's living out, some of the trauma of the war. And then entering a strange world, you had to be really apprehensive.
A fine country. send you off to war. We had the best years of your life. And then the scrap heap.
In the Army, I was a major. Now I'm back selling neckties in the basement.
In the service, us guys amounted to something. But now, give up your job to go to war. Dodge 88s at the front and come back to this.
In the summer of 1946, while my father was still working for the Bergen Evening Record in New Jersey,
This is his daughter
he wrote
speaking.
a series of articles about how difficult it was for the veterans when they were returning home. And it's very interesting to read these articles because he lists town by town what the people were doing to stop affordable housing that was specifically being built to house veterans and to house veterans with their young families. For the most part, do you want to put a bunch of 23, 24-year-old males in apartments in your backyard? And that's what the series of articles discussed, was the difficulties that these veterans had trying to get their lives back together again.
Bill Malden went into the Army.
They had that GI Bill at that time, and I was hoping to see, to just hear that.
He had a talent as an artist, and
I'm sure Bob used that GI Bill, and he must have become a lawyer. That must be him. Bob Leckie, New Brunswick, and everything.
Willie and Joe are often seen
That's got to be the
on
man.
park benches. And there's one scene where this fat cat is in a railroad car.
Yet when you look 40 years later,
at the table, and
you can't be sure in your mind. Positive. Only 95% positive.
Well, that's a veteran. He really hones in directly on these problems, particularly the years 46 to 47, when they were experiencing real problems of homelessness and often despair.
Now in our town, we had a man, Kalaji. Mr. Kalaji, he became a lawyer.
Today, when America's men in uniform look beyond the long years of war, first on their minds is their chance of getting post-war jobs.
I don't have to worry after the war's over. I have the promise of my old job back.
Yeah, but I never had a job. What do I do? Gonna be tough.
All the ball
Not
players.
the time that we get out,
Joe
there'll be
DiMaggio.
millions of people back home all looking for new jobs.
Ted Williams. 3 years. Ted Williams went in for the Korean War. Went back
I
again.
often say that the way to think about the war is this. For 4 years, the whole world stopped, and nobody did anything that wasn't connected to the war. 90%
Bob
of
Feller
American
went in the
jobs,
Navy
believe it or not, during World War II, were
right
war
after
related.
Pearl Harbor.
The whole country was about war. We lived inside a world of war. And that's never happened before. This is what
Jerry
worries
Coleman, who
the
just
GIs
died.
in the foxholes in the last months of the war. They're going to come home and somebody else has their job. Then they find out that Congress has passed the law.
Almost all of them.
That an employer
All the ball
cannot
players went
deny you your former job if you're able to do it. Now that hurts some guys like Bill Guarnier. His employer at Baldwin Works in Philadelphia could simply say to him,
That's when
Bill,
in the 40s, during the war, I went to Yankee Stadium and this guy, Bingo Biggs, was playing left field for for Washington Senators.
Heavy industrial job
He didn't even run after the
they could
ball.
get away with that.
You can imagine
The center fielder almost killed himself making a catch.
Get lost, kid. Couldn't get a job back. Forget about it. There's no legalities involved there. Out
Here he
hit
is.
the pike.
Lost his leg.
Bob Leckie came back and
There's Leckie
surprised his
again.
employer because he threw the language of the bill at him and said, it's against the law. And he got his sports writing job back, even though someone had ably replaced him in a job. So that eased things. And then the expected depression doesn't take place.
They got their
The
jobs back
unemployment
and
rate remains,
the wages were peanuts at that
low.
time.
And there's enough for everyone.
After I come out 10 years later, it was
I went to work for the Ford Motor
wasn't
Company
even $2
on the
an
assembly
hour.
line in Dallas. It was tough. It was very hard work. I was making $1.28 an hour there. And
you made
I quit the
$1.28.
Ford plant making $1.28 an hour and went to work for the post office for 84 cents an hour. People thought I was crazy.
That's the numbers,
But
guys.
who wants to make a career in an assembly line?
I wish I could remember the exact number.
Gravel,
Per hour. I don't think it was $2 an hour.
dragging the road. I never was out of a job.
10 years later.
Government, mechanic, any kind of job that make a buck. I can make $1.
He made it. He'd do it no matter what it was.
Back in 1918, these were pretty exciting pictures. The fighting men of America coming home from France. They planned on picking up their lives just where they'd left them. Only for a lot of them, it didn't work out that way. Not exactly. Some of these marching men wanted to go back to school, but discovered they didn't have the money. Others learned the jobs they'd left behind were
Here's
gone.
where they get the GI
Or if
Bill.
they were there, they didn't want them. They wanted something better.
Oh, them guns.
What about this time, Max? Are these Navy boys going to get the...
They were firing at an island one time when I was in the
this time
Navy.
it's going to be
And they called me to the bridge
Because
to
in Washington, there were a group of
work on
congressmen with
electrical
long
problem. And
memories
they
who were in
fired
the
that
last
5-inch gun.
They knew that when
While
a
I was
man
working
gets
on the
out of the
electrical
Army or
problem,
Navy,
I almost jumped. I didn't know they were going to
Most
fire. I
of
almost
the
jumped
jobs,
overboard.
An education and a home. And that's why Congress passed the law, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known as the GI Bill of Rights.
They didn't believe it. You know, this is too good to be true, you know.
A lot of guys
Just like a
really
lot of
took
our veterans
advantage
that
of it.
didn't
I
do
come
anything.
out,
Army
I
says,
got the
Marine
GI
says.
Bill,
They don't really believe it until
and
they
I
see it, until they
squandered
sit down
it.
and see how easy it is. And
I
and
worked
they're
for the
all
telephone
red
company.
tape.
Telephone company was like
It was
part of
so
the GI
smooth.
Bill.
It was so easy.
And then I left them.
It would pay your tuition in college. If you were married, it would give you $125 a month. It enabled boys to
Just
barely be able to go to school. I got all the way through med school up to my senior year. I had to finance my senior year.
Last year.
We got a certain amount of money.
What did he do? Become a
$90
doctor?
a
Good for
month,
him.
I think. Assist in the farm. Get started.
I would have never been able to go to law school in my circumstances, but because of that GI Bill, I was able to go to law school and get a law degree, which was, you know.
This is what I think happened.
Peter Drucker, who's a very famous economic thinker, he argues that 1945, because of the GI Bill, 44, 45, is as important in American history in some ways as 1776. He says it created the informational society because we double our college enrollment.
But you were limited. You couldn't go
with housing and a college
change
education.
it from one to the
you're
other.
gonna go out into an informational kind of world.
And I blew it by
you're
going
gonna
in
make it
and
happen.
with the phone company. Learn how to climb poles and I wouldn't have made a good lawyer anyway. I'd have.
Is D plus 15, Juan Iwo Jima. Ripid Hill, beyond Hill 362, we're almost beyond the third airport. All of a sudden I remember I was sitting on a rock. I'm out kind of in the middle of nowhere because I don't see anybody
nuts.
else.
That's it.
And then I realized, if you don't get going, the Japanese are going to shoot you. And I thought, I got to do something about this.
Like he said, I
And
forgot
all of a
the
sudden,
war.
Sergeant Wendell came out of the rocks. And he came over there and where I was sitting. He said, come on, Tatum. Come on with me. You're going to be okay. And so I was suffering from combat fatigue. That's where you don't know what happened to you.
I can see the nervousness in his man.
Except you're not crazy necessarily. You're not a coward necessarily. But your mind wouldn't take anymore. How many people can you see killed? 1? 2? 3? 40? Who knows? The mind is different for everybody. I lost more friends, more people. And pretty soon,
like he said,
no matter
we
how
killed
strong
them
you
all.
are, it'll prey on your mind.
2,200 laying on
You
the
can have
beach in the morning.
guilt feelings about it.
2,200 dead.
How come I'm still here?
And they lost 26.
After the war, it was clear that the Veterans Administration, the so-called VA, was going to play an enormous role in the transition from war to peace. And in a highly symbolic move, Eisenhower lobbies to have his second-in-command, Omar Bradley, the guy who led the D-Day invasion. He became the head of the VA.
There's Truman, Ike, and Bradley.
Headline statement. He says, the shooting may be over, but the suffering isn't. And he understood, you know, and Eisenhower understood that these guys have begun the final battle.
That is a common concern among servicemen who have developed nervous conditions during their stay in the Army as to what the public is going to think about them. Undoubtedly, there will be people on the outside who won't have any understanding of the condition, who may think of it as being a rather shameful condition.
Bradley shapes up the VA. He gets rid of the red tape. He gets good doctors. He brings in psychiatrists. A lot of distrust in the military of psychiatry. Some of the guys were told, you know, in their discharge, if you have mental problems, what you want to do is forget about them. If you forget about them, they'll go away. Well, that didn't happen. I see all the cases of post-traumatic stress disorder today. I mean, I visit hospitals myself and talk to veterans. And I notice in those hospitals, VA hospitals, that there are
That's
still
what our buddy
guys in
Bob's
there
got
from
a
World War II.
problem with. I can
They're
see it in him.
89 years old, and some of them are in there for mental problems. 1.2 million
Hard to
guys
forget.
were discharged for mental disabilities in World War II. It's a lot of guys.
Nothing to be ashamed of.
So,
Something to love him
where
because
have
he's
their
got
stories
it.
gone? Did this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder, which used to be called shell shock, did it suddenly erupt after Vietnam? I don't think so. I don't think so.
Unfortunately, most of you fellows have gone through some very severe stresses in the Army. Stresses that civilians are rarely subjected to. In civilian life, you can avoid
Bob
serious
Verdun.
stresses. If a civilian,
That's a different
the average
story.
civilian was subjected to
He was there.
similar stresses, he undoubtedly would have developed the same
did it,
type
too.
of nervous condition that most of you fellows
He
developed.
come home and
All of us
somehow he made
have
it
our
through.
so-called breaking point.
Have a drink once in a while.
And I think it has a lot to do with the way we
Wind up at
period
his
our
front
history.
door laying there
There's
with
the war, and then there's
frost
the
on him when he woke up.
Eisenhower's a
Frost.
general, and now he's a president. The country is going through difficulty
Bob's
at first,
good.
and then we start to
I
win the
like
war,
Bob
then
from
we win the war,
the
then we
first
lose
time
the
I
war,
seen
period,
him.
affluence and prosperity. So the veteran goes from
love
the
him,
parade to college, to the GI Bill, and then the Levittown. And then you begin the story of the 50s. And that's how historians write books.
I still had the
They
GI
periodize
Bill.
history. They put these arbitrary, you know,
Can you
fences.
imagine me as a lawyer?
20s, the 30s.
Oh my
Well,
God.
it's not lived like that. It's not lived like that. As Omar Bradley said, this is the beginning of a struggle for them.
I might have been like
This
Bob
might be their
Leckie.
longest war. The war that, you know, they're going to have to, the individual battle they're going to have to fight.
I never talked about the war for 35 years after I was out. I never talked about it to Florence. I never talked about it to my daughters or my parents or brothers or anybody. In fact, I worked 30-something years at the post office, and there was 3 combat veterans worked there, you know, Marines.
They didn't even talk to
And,
each other
and
about
all
it.
during that 30 years, we never talked about the war. We might tell something that was funny that happened, but as far as the guts and the gore of it, we never talked about it.
The very first.
I could just see that man carrying a mail or
I
something.
guess it would have been in the first year we were married, and we were driving down the street.
And they're all
and
the
a cat or
They
something
all look
had
the same.
been
They're
run
not
over
any
and
fat on.
just
They're perfect.
smashed.
I wouldn't fool with
And
them
I
guys
looked at it and
today.
made some grimace and ooh, look at that. And he looked at me with this
Look at them. Every
kind
one
of
of them.
wonder on his face, and he said, "Oh, Shug, I've had best friends who looked worse than that." And that was it. That was the first time I realized that.
I've asked my father a couple times, you know, where were you in the war? And he said, the war's over, kid, forget about it. That was the answer. You accepted that because that's all you were going to get out of him, or a crutch. If you pushed it any further, you weren't going to get any. That's his way of dealing with. If he didn't want to talk about something, that was his answer.
We were probably in elementary school, and we knew he had a Purple Heart, but we didn't
really understand what that was
a
for.
Purple Heart. What
And
does
we
that
knew that
mean?
he had been shot in the rear end and that he had 4 holes from one bullet. So that was the extent of our knowledge.
I did not know any of his experiences. My father would
This
always
is
tell me that
Lecky's
he won the war,
daughter.
and I always believed him. But I couldn't figure out how he
And he
did it
won
if
the
he wasn't
war
in Europe,
by
because the
himself.
only war that I had ever heard about was the European theater. And the Pacific theater was never really even discussed. So I was somewhat conflicted trying to figure out how he had won the war if he wasn't even in the right place.
I know he thought about it a lot, but he never talked about it. Not through my entire life, except when I
That
typed
must be his
book.
wife speaking.
But he never discussed it. I don't think any of them ever discussed what they went through.
Back in that day, they just didn't go to counseling and seek help when they're not able to sleep and not able to just enjoy life. And he enjoyed his life. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy it. It's just that those days haunted him.
I talked about the war with my wife. She understood everything. She never resisted my talking about my memories. She was unhappy from time to time when I would get very emotional, but you can't help that when you've been through a lot of war. Why, the emotions come with it, whether you like it or not.
I see the nervousness in that man.
Been married to him maybe 6 months. One night he let out this terrible noise and sat straight up in bed. And I just lay there petrified.
In Mobile.
And I finally shook him and woke him up. His nightmare was he had fallen into the Pacific when he was hand flying one of those
That'll
great
give you a
big
nightmare.
four-engine planes. And he had it for about 10 years off and on. But they all came home with some form of a nightmare.
When he was sleeping, you didn't touch him. If you wanted to wake him, you said his name and he was awake instantly. But you just didn't touch him.
In the house in Mountain Lakes, this big
Here's
wonderful
Lecky
house,
again.
my bedroom was next to my parents' bedrooms, so I heard the screams. And I think because I heard the screams, I knew that it was the war that was causing the screams, and therefore I never asked what happened to him in the war because I just assumed it was bad. I mean, my father was indestructible, and for something to have happened to him that would cause him to have these horrific nightmares, I didn't want to know about
And
it.
his daughter never even knew about that book. Didn't read the
My
book
father
till
was
later.
relating to me a story about Lieutenant Brewer, who was brand new with 3rd Platoon. Stood up in the middle of the field with binoculars on, took a bullet
This is
through the
one
neck.
heck of a story, too.
And Dad asked the medic, and the medic said he's not going to make it. He's a goner. And Dad said, got the whole platoon in the middle of the field. I've got to get them out of the field, because he said if they had a machine gun, they'd have mowed
they
us all
left
down. So he left him there. And Bob Brewer ended up working at the CIA, and Dad ends up walking down the halls of the agency one day
Survived.
and runs into this man that he left for dead. And as he told me the story, his lips started quivering, and he ran into the bathroom and
His
threw up.
lips are quivering, too. The son's lips.
My dad's not an emotional person. That's the most visceral of any emotion I've ever seen out of him. It was, yeah, thinking about leaving.
He can't tell his story.
His buddy.
And here he is
When I
alive.
was probably 5 years old, the movie Patton had come out. We were in the living room, and it was just this constant artillery barrage, large caliber gunfire. And then I can remember my dad getting more agitated, and then he got up and went into the kitchen and just started pounding on the refrigerator. Well, of course, my mother knew what was going on, so she talked to him and calmed him down. But what it was, that was his emotional reaction. I mean, he had said that at Peleliu and Okinawa, when they were under heavy artillery fire, they would be in their foxholes and would just beat their fists on the ground.
Wounded there.
sheer frustration and helplessness.
He was upset because
he had always said that the most
he went back and he considered
helpless
that
thing in the
it
world
was a
was to be under heavy
relatively
artillery.
minor wound, and he felt bad that he was going.
I do remember that.
Finally
it was
going
emotional
home.
at the time. It's
Done.
emotional now. And that impressed on me at a very young age what a horrible thing war was, and what a difficult experience it was to recover from.
I guess his father wrote a major book too, also.
Gore Vidal said that he expected that all these great writers were going to come out of the war and write about their experiences. But a lot of writers didn't confront the war directly. Instead, we got what Paul Fussell calls the great silence, Fussell, the literary critic, where Fussell is surprised by the absence of literature in the 40s about the war. The great exception, of course, is Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead. It's brutal confrontation with the awfulness of war.
I think that might have been the last.
It's cold-eyed.
The last guy we were talking
And that was a bestseller. But it took lots of writers who were in the war a long time to write about the experience.
My father said after the third day on Peleliu, it suddenly occurred to me, I've never read anything about what it's really like. So he was determined that he was going to essentially amplify the historical record, if you will, based on his experiences.
With the Old Breed was published in 1981, and it was supposed to be just for the family. It was supposed to be so that my brother and I would have some
40
idea
years
of
later.
what he had been through. Not only that, but something of a catharsis for him to purge his memory, to divest himself of these horrible experiences.
Let me get it down
It is
before
touted, and it is, I think,
I'm
the
gone.
bad courage of World War II, because it's honest, and because he doesn't get in the way of the story, and because of his humility. And he said, what we went through is unforgettable, shouldn't be forgotten. And I think a lot of his feelings about the war have to do with that he didn't
That's the
feel
way you
people
have to
understood
feel.
what
It shouldn't be
men
forgotten.
like him went through.
There was just this sense that the book was having an impact and that it was getting out there.
This is the guy
And we
that-
would get a lot of letters from family members.
I was wrong.
And they always invariably said, thank you. You told my father's story. There
Oh,
was
that's
this
it.
sense
That's his
that he had
father there.
really-
That's
It was
it
the
is.
everyman combat
That was a picture of his
soldiers,
father.
Marines experience. And there was just this incredible sense of gratitude from veterans and their families that at last the truth was out there.
I started going to the 1st Marine Division reunions in 1980, and there was 20 K Company men at that reunion. We'd sit around and talk, and they'd say, Bergen, you remember so-and-so and so? I said, no, I don't remember that. And he said, well, hell, you ought to, you were there. You know, what's wrong with you, you stupid? And then they'd start telling what happened, how it happened, and who was involved in it, and it would come back to me like it happened yesterday. And I think going to those reunions is what straightened me out. I think everybody should go to the reunions and talk to their buddies and kind of get it out in the open, and I think it's good for them.
I went to New York meeting. What happened to war? 47?
Here he is again. Watch
When I
him.
got
He's
there,
perfect.
I got the men from Ecom. I think it was maybe about 7 or 8, maybe 10 from Ecom there that we got together. Good. Next year,
One leg on him.
you
That's
come with
that's
another
enough.
one. He comes with another one. I'll bring another one. Instead of 10, we'll have 20. So next year we had maybe 15, 18. As the years progressed from 47 on, 20, 30, 40, 50. I think up in San Diego, 81 men came.
And then from that, there's a high
81.
point and eventually a low point.
Bigger and bigger and bigger. Each company got together every year.
Then less
then
and less and less
from
and
a-
less.
He was discharged, I think, on December 22nd or 23rd, And then he wrapped up his discharge papers in Christmas papers and gave them to my mom as a Christmas gift, meaning the greatest gift of all is he was finally released from the war and able to start his life with her.
When I married Franny, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
There he is.
I got beautiful memories, that's all. Memories will never leave. Never leave.
Oh, man,
2
I
days.
like that guy.
She came in on the 27th, we were married on the 29th. And we've been married
Took him
4
2
years
days.
now.
Shift come in on the 27th.
Girlfriend Shirley during the war.
Married
when I
on
was
the
in
29th.
Australia.
This
And my wife burned all
This
of
is
my
the
pictures
song.
that
Listen,
I had of
the
Shirley,
story. Listen to this story.
Shortly after we were married, but years
He had a
later,
girlfriend
my
in
wife
Australia.
Mary called me. I was at the office, and she said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, sit down." She said, "Guess who's here?" And I said, "Eleanor Roosevelt." And she said, "No, Shirley." And I said,
Shirley's
"Shirley
here."
who?" And she said, "Shirley, you know who. She's here." And she has her family with her. And Mary wouldn't let them leave. Mary kept them day after day after day after day after day.
Wait for the
in this little
punchline.
small house that we lived in. She said, "I want to be sure you got enough of Shirley." But then, maybe 10
Oh,
years
what a
later,
guy.
Shirley's oldest child came through Mobile.
This is the
and,
end,
he
the
looked us
punchline
up,
at the
and
end.
he
Listen.
and my daughter Mary fell in love and got married. So my daughter is married to my old girlfriend's son from Australia.
People think, well, you know, you're so damn good looking, you know, that you must have a gang of women. I never had
When
a
they
bunch
dropped
of
them
women. I had one.
bombs and sunk 2
And that's the only
carriers.
one I wanted. And
He wasn't the pilot,
even though
but he was
she
the
predeceased
gunner.
me, as far as I'm concerned,
Midway.
I'm still
He
married to
sunk 2
Irene.
carriers in one day.
And, that's the way I'll die.
They come back and landed and went back again and got the what? The one that was
Nobody ever
left.
heard of New Britain. Cape Lock and New Britain, they never even knew a battle fought there. 90% of the people in the
same
United
day.
States never knew a battle existed there. In Peleliu, the same
Battle
way.
of Midway.
After I started going to the reunions, that's about the time in my life that I decided that the stories of the battles
The
should be
pilot must
told.
have been,
They
must
should
have
be
been
written,
dead when
and
they did
should not
this
be
here
forgotten.
because I seen them. Here's
To a certain
Lecky.
extent, my father's writing was the most important thing in his life. I really think his writing kept him centered, kept him
I
focused.
stood in front of that,
And
at the desk, at the
Therefore,
front of
there was always a distance
talking to that
between
man
my
about the
father
bill.
and at least me. I don't know if my brothers would say the same thing, but there was a distance that was broken when I read him, because he let you in. He let you in much, much farther than we were ever allowed in when we were children. The first
They
time I
weren't
read
allowed
Hamlet
into
for my
that.
pillow, I cried most of the way through it. And I cried most of the way through it because I hadn't read it. And now, by the time I read it, he
About
was
to
gone.
cry now.
And now I couldn't, there was nothing I could say. I couldn't say, now I understand the nightmares. Now I understand a lot of things. So I cried most of the way through it.
I understand too.
He always remembered the day that they landed on Peleliu, the day they landed at Okinawa. But he wouldn't say anything to me about it. But it would be a very hard day for him. And I remember the last time he went to church, it was Easter Sunday. And we sat there, and for some reason, it had nothing to do with the service.
He cried and he never come back
But the
in.
tears rolled down his face, all through the service. And he never went back to church. The Easter Sunday is when they landed on Okinawa.
We were born, my generation, 10 years later, 9 years later, and missed it.
These experiences.
But I
are
went there
universal.
to join the Marine Corps. At that time, it was the Korean War.
They go back to home.
It happened the way it happened.
To the Iliad,
And
which is about warfare.
our youth,
and
there's a
cost
lot of them that
and comradeship.
do the same thing.
to the Odyssey, which is about returning.
If need be.
And
now I'm beginning to wonder.
Veterans experience it, war veterans experience it.
When I seen that
it's just
thing about all these back bad
the world
conduct
within
discharges,
war that you enter,
what in the
when
world?
you get into, especially total conflicts, it's a transforming
Could we win again? Could we do it again? God, I hope so.
It's a warning to history, really. I mean, most of these guys tell you they don't want another one.
We were brought up to think that there was no country like our country, and it was our duty to take care of it for the next generation. And then along came this wall that threw us into the middle of it. And as the boys say over and over, we just did our duty. It was what we were supposed to do, and we did it. And they still, as old men, feel that way, but they felt that way as young men.
That's what I mean.
By looking at these guys, by shedding light on a darkened period of American history, I think what we're accomplishing is we're humanizing these guys.
One heck of a generation.
They have been stick figures that were heroes in warfare and made the easy transition home. It's never that easy.
It's not easy.
These guys
a lot of countries, when it comes down, chips are down, they give up.
But dealt with them.
They'll run the other way.
Now, not every guy turned out great, and not every problem was solved. But my God, when you look at this whole situation and the kind
somebody
of country
does
that
wrong
they
to
created,
you,
the kind of the
you don't look for trouble, but when it happens,
they made it.
You attack. Hey, what do you say? God bless America and watch over us. Yet they're not the heroes. The real heroes, like they say, are dead. Oh, these guys are heroes. There's Lecky there. Take care, everyone.